The restaurant went silent the moment Julian Thorne lost his temper. Crystal glasses rattled as the billionaire screamed at a waitress in front of New York's wealthiest elite, everyone waiting for her to break. She didn't. What no one knew, what Julian could never have imagined, was that the exhausted woman standing in front of him had nothing left to lose an eviction notice at home, a brother dying in a hospital bed, and a line she would not allow anyone to cross. When Eleanor Vance looked him in the eye and calmly spoke 7 words, the balance of power shifted instantly. Julian thought he was humiliating a waitress. In truth, he had just challenged the one person who would dismantle his empire and teach him what respect really meant. The noise inside Le Jardin was a specific kind of quiet, the hum of extreme wealth. It was the sound of silver forks hitting bone china, the rustle of silk dresses, and the murmur of deals worth millions being whispered over plates of truffle risotto. For Elena Vance, it was just the sound of her feet throbbing. She adjusted her apron in the reflection of the brass espresso machine, trying to smooth out the exhaustion on her face. She had been on her feet for 10 hours. Her shift at the diner had ended at 4:41 p.m., and her shift here at the upscale Manhattan bistro had started at 5 p.m. It was now nearly midnight. Every muscle in her body screamed for rest, but the image of the eviction notice sitting on her kitchen counter kept her spine straight. Table 4 needs a top-up on the sparkling Elena. Move it, Marcus, the floor manager, hissed as he breezed past her. Marcus was a man who believed stress was a management style. And fix your hair. You look like you walked here through a wind tunnel. Yes, Marcus, Elena said, her voice steady. She tucked a stray strand of chestnut hair behind her ear and grabbed the chilled bottle of Dom Pérignon. Table 4 was the problem table. Everyone knew it. Sitting there was Julian Thorne. Even if you didn't read the financial papers, you knew Julian Thorne. He was 32, brutally handsome in that sharp, predatory way, and currently the CEO of Thorne Dynamics. He had a reputation for 2 things: making billions in hostile takeovers and having a temper that could strip paint off a wall. Tonight he looked ready to burn the restaurant down. He had been on his phone since he sat down, ignoring his date, a model named Chloe, who was currently picking at her salad with the enthusiasm of someone watching paint dry. Julian was gripping his phone so hard, his knuckles were white. I don't care what the board says, Arthur. Julian's voice rose above the polite hum of the room. Tell them if they back out now, I will gut that company and sell the scraps. A few heads turned. At a nearby table, a senator looked uncomfortable. Elena approached the table cautiously. Her job was to be invisible. Pour the wine, clear the plates, disappear. She waited for a pause in his tirade to step in. No, I am not calming down. They are incompetence personified. Julian slammed his hand on the table. The cutlery jumped. Elena took a breath and stepped forward, reaching for his empty glass. More champagne, sir. Julian snapped his head, up his eyes wild with misplaced aggression. He didn't see a person. He saw an interruption. He saw an obstacle. Do you see me on the phone? He barked, his voice loud enough to silence the 3 nearest tables. I apologize, sir. I just thought you didn't think. Julian stood up, towering over her. The restaurant went deadly silent. The ambient music seemed to fade away. I am in the middle of saving a billion-dollar merger, and you are hovering over me with a bottle of wine like a vulture. Can you not do the one simple thing you are paid to do, and wait? Elena took a step back, her heart hammering against her ribs. The bottle in her hand felt heavy and slick with condensation. She saw Marcus in the corner, his face pale, frantically motioning for her to walk away. But Elena didn't walk away. She couldn't. It wasn't just the exhaustion. It wasn't just the eviction notice. It was the fact that earlier that morning she had visited her younger brother Leo in the hospital. She had watched him try to smile through the pain of his dialysis. She was working herself into an early grave to keep him alive, to pay for treatments that insurance refused to cover. She had swallowed her pride 1,000 times for rude customers, but something about the way Julian Thorne looked at her like she was dirt on his Italian leather shoes snapped something inside her. "Get out of my face!" Julian shouted, sweeping his hand through the air. He didn't hit her, but the motion was violent enough that she flinched. Incompetent help is why this city is going to hell. The silence in the restaurant was absolute. The senator was staring. Chloe the date was looking down at her lap. Elena felt a cold calm wash over her. It was the calm of someone who had nothing left to lose. She set the expensive bottle of champagne down on the table with a definitive thud. She looked up at him. Julian was 6'2", broad-shouldered and radiating power. Elena was 5'5", and wearing a uniform that belonged to the restaurant. But in that moment, she stood taller than him. She locked eyes with the billionaire. "Shout at me again," she said, her voice low but cutting through the silence like a razor. "And this ends." Julian blinked. The sheer audacity of it seemed to short-circuit his rage. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. He saw the dark circles under her amber eyes, the fraying collar of her shirt, the trembling of her hands that she was trying to hide. "Excuse me," Julian whispered, the menace dropping to a dangerous octave. "You are a guest," Elena said, her voice shaking slightly but gaining strength. "I am a server. I am not your servant. I am not your punching bag. And I am certainly not the reason your business deal is failing. I am a human being, working a double shift to pay bills you will never have to worry about. So you can sit down and treat me with dignity, or you can shout at me again." Clear's throat. "But if you shout, I walk, and I take this bottle with me." The room held its breath. Marcus was hyperventilating by the kitchen door. This was it. This was the moment she got fired. This was the moment Julian Thorne destroyed her. Julian stared at her. His jaw worked. The vein in his temple throbbed. Then he did the unthinkable. The rage drained out of his face, replaced by something unreadable. Shock respect. He slowly sank back into his chair. He picked up his napkin and placed it on his lap. He looked at the phone still clutched in his hand, then looked back at Elena. "Pour the wine," he said softly. It wasn't an apology, but it was a surrender. Elena didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply picked up the bottle, poured a perfect measure into his flute, and then poured one for his date. "Enjoy your evening," she said professionally. She turned and walked away, her head held high. She made it all the way to the kitchen, swinging doors before her knees gave out. The kitchen was chaos, but the moment Elena burst through the doors, it went quiet. The chef's usually screaming orders stared at her. The dishwashers paused. Marcus descended on her like a hawk. "Are you insane?" he shrieked, dragging her toward the back office, away from the ears of the kitchen staff. "Do you have a death wish, Elena?" That was Julian Thorne. He could buy this building and turn it into a parking lot just to spite us. He was screaming at me. "Marcus," Elena said, leaning against the cold stainless steel counter, trying to stop her hands from shaking. "I didn't swear. I didn't yell. I just stood up for myself. There is no standing up to men like that in this industry." Marcus rubbed his temples. "I'm sorry, Elena. You know I like you. You're a hard worker. But I can't keep you. If he complains, and he will complain, corporate will have my head if you're still on the payroll." Elena felt the floor drop out from under her. "Marcus, please. You know about Leo. You know I need the insurance. I have rent due in 2 days. I can't, Marcus said, avoiding her eyes. He pulled an envelope from his pocket, cash from the petty cash box. Here's your wages for the week, plus tonight's tips. Just go out the back, please. Fired. She had stood up for her dignity, and the cost was her livelihood. Elena took the envelope. She didn't argue. She knew how the world worked. The rich screamed, and the poor paid for the noise. She changed out of her uniform in the cramped staff locker room, putting on her worn jeans and a thick sweater. She wrapped her scarf tight against the New York winter. As she walked out the back alley door, the cold air hit her face, drying the tears she refused to let fall. She checked her phone. One message from the hospital. Nurse Sarah Leo is asking for you. He's having a bad night. Elena choked back a sob. She had to be strong for Leo. She couldn't let him know she just lost the job that was keeping him alive. She walked toward the subway station, her head down against the wind. The city felt massive and cruel tonight. Miss Vance. The voice came from a sleek black sedan parked at the curb just past the alley entrance. The window rolled down. Elena stopped, gripping her bag tight. Yes. The driver got out. He was a large man in a suit wearing an earpiece. Mr. Thorne would like a word. Elena's stomach twisted. I don't work for Le Jardin anymore. He got me fired. Isn't that enough? He doesn't want to complain, the driver said, opening the back door. Elena hesitated. She should run. She should get on the subway and disappear. But curiosity and a strange lingering anger kept her rooted. Inside the car, Julian Thorne was sitting in the shadows. He wasn't on his phone. He was just watching her. I'm not getting in, Elena said firmly from the sidewalk. I heard Marcus let you go, Julian said. His voice was different now. The shouting was gone, replaced by a smooth, controlled baritone. I didn't ask him to. You didn't have to, Elena shot back. Men like you create a blast radius. You don't have to touch anything to break it. Julian leaned forward, his face coming into the light of the street lamp. He looked tired. Beneath the arrogance, he looked exhausted. You're right, he admitted. Elena blinked. Had she heard him correctly, I behaved poorly, Julian continued. I was under significant pressure. That is not an excuse, but it is the context. You were the only person in that room brave enough to check me. My board of directors doesn't even do that. Is there a point to this? Mr. Thorne, I have a brother to get to. I need that, Julian said, pointing a finger at her. That fire, that inability to be intimidated by wealth. You need what my public image is in shambles, Julian said, getting straight to business. The merger I was screaming about. It's failing because the other company thinks I'm volatile, unstable, a liability. They think I can't play nice with others. He paused, looking at her intense glare. If the press finds out I got a waitress fired tonight, I'm finished. But if the press finds out that I hired that waitress as my personal assistant because I admired her integrity, that changes the narrative. Elena laughed a harsh, dry sound. You want to hire me? You don't even know me. I know you risked your job to demand respect. I know you're hard-working, and I know you need money. Marcus tells me you have family medical issues. Elena stiffened. Don't talk about my brother. I can help your brother Julian, said softly. The air left Elena's lungs. I need a personal assistant who isn't a sycophant. Someone who will tell me the truth even when I'm shouting. Especially when I'm shouting. I'll pay you triple what you made at the restaurant. Full benefits. Best insurance in the state. It covers everything. Dialysis, transplants, recovery. Elena stared at him. It was a deal with the devil. He was arrogant, rude, and volatile, but he held the key to Leo's life in his hand. Triple war, she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "And a signing bonus," Julian added, $10,000 tonight. Elena looked down the street at the subway entrance, then back at the man who had ruined her night and was now offering to save her life. "I have conditions," she said. Julian smirked, a genuine rare expression that transformed his face. "I expected nothing less." "Get in the car, Miss Vance. We can discuss your terms on the way to the hospital." She got in, but as the heavy door thudded shut, sealing her in the quiet luxury of the billionaire's world, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that she hadn't just accepted a job. She had stepped onto a battlefield. The transition from pouring coffee to managing a billionaire's life wasn't smooth. It was a car crash. The very next morning, a town car picked Elena up from her small apartment in Queens. She had barely slept. After the confrontation at the restaurant, they had gone to the hospital. True to his word, Julian had made a single phone call, and Leo was moved from a crowded ward with a flickering light to a private suite at Mount Si. The doctors suddenly had time for questions. The nurses suddenly smiled. It was sickening how easy it was for money to buy survival. When Elena walked into the glass and steel lobby of Thorne Dynamics, she felt like an imposter. She was wearing her best outfit, a grey pencil skirt and a white blouse she'd bought for interviews years ago. But compared to the women clicking across the marble floor in Gucci and Prada, she looked like she was wearing a costume. Clear's throat. She took the private elevator to the top floor. The doors opened to a reception area that looked more like a museum than an office. "You're late," Julian said without looking up. He was pacing behind a desk that cost more than Eleanor's entire education. The office was all glass, overlooking the city he treated like a chessboard. "It is 8 a.m. Exactly, Mr. Thorne," Elena replied, checking her cheap wristwatch. "You said 8 a.m. If you're on time, you're late. If you're early, you're on time." Julian stopped pacing and looked at her. He looked different in the daylight. Sharper, colder. "Here is your tablet. It has my schedule, my dietary restrictions, my contact list, and the livestock ticker. Do not lose it. Do not break it. It controls my life." Elena took the tablet. It was heavy. "What's my first task?" "Survive," a female voice said from the doorway. Elena turned. Standing there was a woman who looked like she had been carved out of ice. She had platinum blonde hair cut into a sharp bob, wearing a suit that screamed power. This was Isabella Sterling, the Vice President of Operations. "You must be the new experiment," Isabella said, her eyes scanning Elena from head to toe, lingering on her scuffed heels. "Julian, are we really doing this?" a waitress. "The board is going to have an aneurysm. The board works for me." "Isabella," Julian snapped. "Elena is here to keep me grounded. Isn't that what the PR team wanted?" "A softer image. They wanted you to get a dog, Julian. Not a stray person," Isabella said with a tight, fake smile. She walked over to Elena. "I give you 3 days, honey. His last assistant left in an ambulance, stress-induced ulcer." "I have a name," Elena said, meeting Isabella's cold gaze. "It's Elena." Isabella laughed softly. "I'll learn it if you're still here on Friday." The rest of the morning was a baptism by fire. Elena wasn't just an assistant. She was a gatekeeper. She had to learn the internal politics of Thorne Dynamics instantly. She learned that Julian drank 4 espressos before noon, that he hated the color blue in pie charts, and that he was currently in a war with a rival tech firm, Vanguard. But the real test came at 2 calls p.m., the merger meeting. This was the deal Julian had been screaming about at the restaurant. The representatives from Novatech were here. If Julian acquired Novatech, his company would dominate the AI market. If he failed, the stock would tank. "Sit in the corner," Julian commanded Elena as they entered the boardroom. "Take notes. Say nothing. And if I start to escalate, you signal me. Signal you. Tap your pen on the table." "Twice," Julian said, adjusting his tie. He looked nervous. It was the first time she had seen him look human. The meeting started well. The Novatech CAO, a calm, older man named Mr. Tanaka, seemed impressed by the numbers. But then the lawyers started nitpicking. "We have concerns about the leadership stability," the lead lawyer said, sliding a folder across the table. "There are reports of outbursts. Mr. Thorne, our board is worried you are too volatile to steward our legacy." Julian stiffened. Elena saw his hand clench into a fist under the table. The vein in his temple began to throb. "My volatility," Julian said through gritted teeth, "is the reason this company is worth billions. I take risks. There is a difference between risk and recklessness," the lawyer pushed. "We heard about an incident at a restaurant just last night, screaming at service staff." The room went deadly quiet. Isabella, sitting across the table, smirked. She had leaked it. Elena knew it instantly. Julian's face turned red. He opened his mouth, ready to unleash the dragon. He was about to confirm their worst fears. Tap. Tap. The sound was sharp in the silence. Julian froze. He looked toward the corner of the room. Elena was sitting there, her posture perfect, holding her pen against the mahogany table. She didn't look scared. She looked at him with an expectant, calm expression. It was the same look she had given him when she held the champagne bottle. "Shout at me again, and this ends." It broke his trance. Julian closed his mouth. He took a deep breath, inhaling for 4 seconds, exhaling for 4. He turned back to the lawyer, a forced but charming smile appearing on his face. "You are absolutely right," Julian said. The lawyer blinked, surprised. "I am passionate sometimes, too passionate. That is why I have hired Miss Vance here." He gestured to Elena. "She was the server at the restaurant last night." Julian lied smoothly. "I wasn't screaming at her. We were debating a spirited debate about service quality. I was so impressed by her fortitude that I hired her immediately to manage my communications. I am committed to listening to new perspectives." Mr. Tanaka looked at Elena. "Is this true, Miss Vance?" Elena stood up. Her legs were shaking, but she remembered Leo in the hospital bed. She remembered the rent due. "It is, Sir Elena," said her voice clear. "Mr. Thorne is demanding, but he respects strength. He values the truth above all else. That is why I agreed to work for him." Mr. Tanaka studied her for a long moment, then smiled. "A man who can admit he needs help is a man we can work with." The tension broke. The deal was back on. As they left the boardroom, Julian grabbed Elena's arm. His grip was tight, vibrating with adrenaline. "You saved me," he whispered, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "I did my job," Elena replied, pulling her arm away. "But don't lie about me again. We weren't debating. You were being a bully." Julian didn't get angry. Instead, a slow grin spread across his face. "Get used to the lies, Elena. We have a charity gala on Saturday, and you're going to be my date." The days leading up to the gala were a blur of work and transformation. The media had caught wind of the story The Billionaire and the Waitress. It was a Cinderella story, and the public ate it up. But for Elena, it felt less like a fairy tale, and more like a tactical operation. Julian didn't treat her like a girlfriend. He treated her like a project. He hired stylists to fix her hair, tutors to teach her which fork to use for salad, and a PR coach to teach her how to dodge questions about her past. "You are not Elena Vance, the girl from Queens," the PR coach told her. "You are Elena Vance, the executive liaison. You are mysterious. You are capable." On the night of the gala, Elena stood in front of the full-length mirror in the guest suite of Julian's penthouse. She was wearing a dress that cost more than her parents' house, a midnight blue velvet gown that hugged her curves and trailed on the floor like liquid water. Diamonds dripped from her ears. She looked beautiful. She looked like she belonged. But inside she felt hollow. She hadn't seen Leo in 2 days because Julian had kept her working until midnight. She was a doll in a golden house. Ready Julian was leaning against the doorframe. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. He looked devastatingly handsome, but his eyes were guarded. "I feel ridiculous," Elena said, turning to face him. "You look formidable," Julian corrected. He walked over and handed her a small clutch bag. "Tonight is the final test. If we charm the investors at the gala, the Novatech deal closes on Monday. Isabella will be there. She will try to rattle you. Don't let her." "Why does she hate me so much?" Elena asked. "Because she wants my job," Julian said simply. "And she thinks you are my weakness." They arrived at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where the gala was being held. The flashes of the paparazzi cameras were blinding. "Julian, Elena over here." Julian placed a hand on the small of her back. It was meant to be a possessive gesture for the cameras, but his hand was warm, and for a second, Elena leaned into it. Inside the great hall was transformed into a ballroom. There were sculptures of ice rivers of champagne and the most powerful people in New York. Elena played her part perfectly. She laughed at the bad jokes of bankers. She discussed art with collectors using the cheat sheet Julian had made her memorize. She saw Julian watching her from across the room, a look of pride on his face. Then the trap sprung. Elena was at the buffet, reaching for a glass of water, when Isabella appeared next to her. "Enjoying the masquerade?" Isabella whispered, sipping a martini. "I'm working, Isabella. You should try it," Elena retorted. Isabella smirked. "You think you're special, don't you? You think he actually respects you." "Oh, honey, you're just a prop, a poverty shield. I don't know what you're talking about. Didn't he tell you Isabella leaned in close, her perfume cloying and sweet? The board voted to oust him last week. They said he was too out of touch with the common man. He needed a commoner to parade around to save his seat. Once the Novatech deal is signed on Monday, you're gone. He has a severance package already drafted on his laptop. Check the file named Operation Clean Sweep." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. Operation Clean Sweep. It wasn't just a job. It wasn't just about his temper. She was a disposable prop to save his career, and he planned to discard her the moment he got what he wanted. She looked across the room. Julian was laughing with Mr. Tanaka. He looked so charming, so fake. "Excuse me," Elena mumbled. She felt sick. She needed air. She turned to leave, but in her haste, she didn't see the waiter passing behind her with a tray of red wine. Crash. The tray tipped. 3 glasses of heavy Cabernet shattered against the front of her midnight blue gown. The sound echoed through the hall. The music stopped. Elena stood there, a massive blood-red stain spreading across her chest and stomach. She looked like a murder victim. Claire's throat. The silence was agonizing. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "Look at her." "Classless," another voice muttered. "You can take the girl out of the diner." Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes. The humiliation was total. Isabella was standing nearby, covering her mouth in mock horror, but her eyes were dancing with victory. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hide the stain. She wanted to vanish. She waited for Julian to come over. She waited for him to yell at the waiter or to yell at her for being clumsy. She waited for the volatile billionaire to make a scene. But Julian didn't yell. He walked through the crowd, parting the sea of onlookers. He didn't look at the stain. He didn't look at the waiter. He looked only at her eyes. He stopped in front of her. He took off his tuxedo jacket, a garment worth thousands, and wrapped it around her shoulders. He buttoned it, covering the stain completely. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. "No," Elena whispered, her voice trembling. "Julian, I ruined the dress. I ruined the night." Julian turned to the room. He put an arm around her, pulling her close against his side. He looked at the staring crowd. Then his eyes landed on Isabella. "My assistant," Julian announced, his voice booming through the hall, "has been working 18-hour days to ensure this company succeeds. She is exhausted because she carries more weight on her shoulders than half of you combined. If a little wine is the worst thing that happens tonight, we are lucky." He looked down at Elena. "Let's go. I'm taking you home." "But the investors," Elena stammered. "Mr. Tanaka, to hell with the investors," Julian said, loud enough for Mr. Tanaka to hear. "I'm not making you stand here wet and cold for a stock price." He walked her out. He walked her right past the shocked press, past the fuming Isabella, and into the waiting car. For the first time since they met, Julian Thorne had chosen a person over a profit. But as the car pulled away, Elena couldn't forget what Isabella had said. Operation Clean Sweep. She looked at Julian, who was staring out the window, his jaw tight. Was this kindness, or was he just protecting his investment until Monday? "Julian," she asked softly. "Yes." "What happens on Monday?" Julian stiffened. He didn't look at her. "We signed the deal." And after that, the silence that filled the car was heavy, suffocating, and terrifying. Julian didn't answer, and that was an answer in itself. Sunday morning in Julian Thorne's penthouse was usually silent, but for Elena the silence was deafening. It screamed of the question she had asked in the car, the question Julian hadn't answered. What happens on Monday? Julian had left early for a pre-merger strategy meeting with his lawyers, leaving Elena alone in the sprawling apartment. He had left his primary laptop on the kitchen island, a rare oversight for a man obsessed with security. Elena stared at the sleek silver machine. She knew the passcode. He had made her memorize it on day one, the date his father died. Check the file named Operation Clean Sweep. Isabella had said Elena told herself not to look. She told herself that Julian was different now. He had given her his jacket. He had defended her against the elite of New York. He was paying for Leo's dialysis. But trust is a fragile thing when you've spent your whole life surviving on the edge of poverty. Her fingers moved before her brain could stop them. She typed the code. The screen flared to life. She opened the internal drive. She typed Clean Sweep into the search bar. A single PDF file appeared. Project Clean Sweep Executive Summary. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She clicked it. The document was dated 4 days ago. It was a detailed PR strategy timeline. Phase 1, humanize the CEO, the Cinderella narrative. Phase 2, secure Novatech merger. Phase 3, dissolution of narrative. Elena scrolled down her breath, catching in her throat. There was a subsection titled Asset Disposal. Upon the successful signing of the Novatech merger, the temporary contract with Miss Elena Vance will be terminated. A non-disclosure agreement (NDA) will be issued along with a severance payment of $50,000 to ensure silence regarding the arrangement. Reason for termination: cultural incompatibility or personal family matters. Elena read it twice, then 3 times. Asset disposal. She wasn't a person to him. She wasn't a friend. She was an asset, a temporary fix to a PR problem. The jacket, the defense at the gala, the late-night conversations about art and life, it was all part of Phase 1. He was just a very, very good actor. She felt a physical blow to her chest. It wasn't just the loss of the job. It was the humiliation of believing, for just a fleeting second, that she mattered. She heard the elevator ding. Julian was back. Elena stepped away from the laptop, but she didn't close the file. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the city that felt colder than ever. Elena. Julian's voice echoed from the hallway. He sounded energized. The lawyers are happy. They think the stunt with the jacket actually pulled well. They say it makes me look protective. We're going too. He walked into the kitchen and stopped. He saw the open laptop. He saw the file on the screen. The silence that stretched between them was heavy enough to crush bones. Julian looked at the screen, then at Elena's back. He didn't panic. He didn't yell. He just let out a long, weary sigh. "Isabella told you where to look," he said. "It wasn't a question." Elena turned around. Her eyes were dry. She had no tears left for men like him. "Is it true?" she asked. "It was a contingency plan," Julian said, walking toward the counter. He closed the laptop. "When I hired you, I didn't know you. I didn't know if you could handle the pressure. My team drafts exit strategies for everyone. It's standard protocol." "Standard protocol," Elena repeated, her voice flat. "Asset disposal. Is that what I am, trash to be taken out once the deal is signed?" "No," Julian said, taking a step toward her. "Eleanor, things have changed. You know that. Last night was phase 1. She cut him off. And tomorrow is Monday. Phase 3. She walked over to the table where she had left her purse. She picked it up. "I'm resigning, Julian. Effective immediately." "You can't," Julian said, his voice hardening. "We have the signing ceremony tomorrow morning. If you aren't there, if the press sees I'm alone, the stock drops, the deal wobbles." "That sounds like a you problem," Elena said. "Elena, think about Leo," Julian said sharply. Elena froze. She spun around, her eyes blazing. "Don't you dare," she hissed. "Don't you dare use my dying brother as leverage. You rich people think money gives you the right to own souls. You paid for his treatment." "Yes, and I will pay you back every single cent, even if it takes me the rest of my life. But I will not let you buy my dignity." "I'm not threatening him," Julian said, running a hand through his hair, looking genuinely frustrated. "I'm trying to tell you that I can help you. Why are you so obsessed with pride? Pride doesn't pay bills." "No," Elena said, walking to the elevator. "But it's the only thing that lets you sleep at night." She hit the button. The doors opened. "If you walk out that door," Julian warned, his voice dropping to that dangerous low register he had used in the restaurant. "You are breaching contract. You walk away with nothing." Elena looked at him. The man who had everything and nothing. "I walked in here with nothing, Julian. I'm comfortable with it." The door slid shut, cutting off the image of Julian Thorne standing alone in his tower. Monday morning arrived with a torrential downpour. New York City was grey, wet, and miserable. Inside the headquarters of Thorne Dynamics, the mood was electric. Today was the day the Novatech merger. The boardroom was packed. Lawyers, bankers, and the entire executive team sat around the long mahogany table. At the head of the table sat Julian Thorne. He looked impeccable. His suit was sharp, his hair perfect, but his eyes were bloodshot. He hadn't slept. To his right there was an empty chair. "Where is the lovely Miss Vance?" Mr. Tanaka asked, arranging his papers. "I was hoping to thank her for the recommendation on the opera." Julian stared at the empty leather chair. It felt like a gap in his own rib cage. "She is indisposed," Julian said stiffly. Isabella, sitting on his left, let out a small, satisfied hum. She slid a folder toward Julian. "Since the assistant position is currently vacant," Isabella announced to the room, "I have taken the liberty of preparing the final press release myself. We can announce the merger and the restructuring of your staff simultaneously." She looked at Julian, her eyes gleaming. She had won. Clear's throat. She had driven the stray dog away. Julian looked down at the papers. The numbers were all there. Billions of dollars. Dominance of the market. Everything he had worked for since he took over the company at 22. All he had to do was sign. But the room was too quiet. He missed the sound of a pen tapping. Tap, tap. The signal to breathe. The signal that he wasn't alone. "Mr. Thorne," a lawyer prompted. "We need your signature on line 4. Julian picked up his pen. The Clear's throat tip hovered over the paper. He thought about the restaurant. He thought about Elena standing up to him when everyone else cowered. He thought about her in the kitchen refusing to be bought. Pride is the only thing that lets you sleep at night. Julian looked at Isabella. He looked at the eager faces of the board members who only cared about the profit margins. "No," Julian said. The room blinked. "Excuse me," the lawyer asked. Julian threw the pen down. It bounced off the table and skittered across the floor. "I'm not signing it." Julian, Isabella hissed, leaning in. "Have you lost your mind? This is the deal of the century." "It's a deal with a hollow company," Julian said, standing up. "Mr. Tanaka, I apologize, but I cannot move forward with this merger today." "May I ask why?" Mr. Tanaka asked, his expression unreadable. "Because my company is broken," Julian said, his voice rising. "We treat people like assets. We draft disposal plans for human beings. I built a machine, not a business. And until I fix that, I don't deserve to grow." He looked at Isabella. "You're fired, Isabella." Isabella gasped, standing up. "You can't fire me." The board can fire me if they want," Julian shouted, the old fire returning. But this time, it wasn't directed at a waiter. It was directed at the rot in his own world. "But as of this second, I am the CEO and you are gone. Get your things. Operation Clean Sweep starts with you." The room was in chaos. People were shouting. Phones were ringing. Julian didn't care. He walked out of the boardroom. He ignored his secretary. He ignored the security guards. He walked straight to the elevator and hit the button for the lobby. He ran out of the building into the pouring rain. He didn't wait for his driver. He didn't wait for an umbrella. He flagged down a yellow taxi, soaking his 1,000 suit in seconds. "Where to?" the driver asked, eyeing the dripping billionaire in the rearview mirror. Julian realized he didn't know her address. He had never asked. He knew her brother's hospital, but not her home. He frantically pulled out his phone, accessing the HR files he had never bothered to read personally. Vance Elena, 412. Oak Street, Queens. Queens. Julian breathed. "Go as fast as you can." As the taxi wove through the traffic, Julian stared at the rain streaking the window. He had blown up a billion-dollar deal. He had likely lost his company. But for the first time in 10 years, he felt like he was waking up. The sound of duct tape tearing off the roll sounded like a scream in the quiet department. Elena Vance smoothed the tape over the cardboard box, her fingers pressing down so hard her knuckles turned white. It was the 3rd box she had packed in an hour. Her life, it turned out, fit into very small spaces. A stack of books, her brother's framed drawings, a few sweaters and the pair of comfortable sneakers she used for waitressing. Outside the Queen's sky was a bruised purple, unleashing a torrential downpour that rattled the thin window panes. The radiator in the corner hissed and clanked, struggling to fight off the damp chill that had settled into Elena's bones. She sat back on her heels, wiping a stray hair from her forehead. Her phone was buzzing on the floor, vibrating against the linoleum. 5th missed calls. She didn't need to look to know who they were from. The press, likely. Or maybe Marcus, begging her to come back to Le Jardin now that she was famous. Or perhaps it was Julian's lawyers calling to threaten her with the NDA she hadn't signed yet. Asset disposal. The words burned in her mind like a brand. She had foolishly allowed herself to believe that the last week had been real. The way Julian had looked at her at the gala, the way he had defended her honor. She had thought it was a connection, but to him, she was just a line item on a spreadsheet, a variable to be managed, and then deleted. She stood up, grabbing the photo of her and Leo from the mantel. Leo was smiling in the picture, unaware that his sister had just walked away from the only man who could easily pay for the kidney he needed. "I'll find another way, Leo," she whispered to the empty room. "I won't sell my soul for it." Thud, thud, thud. The heavy pounding on her front door made her jump. It wasn't a polite knock. It was the desperate hammering of someone in trouble. Elena froze. The eviction notice wasn't due for another 3 days. Had the landlord come early, or worse, had the paparazzi found her address? She grabbed her umbrella from the corner, gripping it like a baseball bat. She crept toward the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Who is it?" She called out, her voice, trembling but loud. Elena opened the door. The voice was ragged, shouting over the sound of the rain, but she knew it instantly. It was the voice that had commanded boardrooms and silenced restaurants. But now it sounded broken. She unlocked the deadbolt and kept the chain on opening the door, a mere 2 in. The sight that greeted her took the breath from her lungs. Julian Thorne stood in the dark, narrow hallway of her tenement building. The King of New York looked like he had been shipwrecked. His custom-tailored charcoal suit was soaked black, clinging to his frame. His hair, usually styled to perfection, was plastered to his forehead, water dripping from his nose and chin. He was shivering violently. "Julian," she breathed, What are you doing here?" "The door," he gasped, his teeth chattering. "Please let me in." "You shouldn't be here," Elena said, her grip on the door tightening. "The signing ceremony is live on television right now. I saw the alert on my phone. You're supposed to be merging with Novatech." "There is no merger," Julian shouted, slamming his hand against the doorframe in frustration. "Elena, open the damn door before I freeze to death." She hesitated. Part of her, the part that had read the asset disposal file, wanted to slam the door in his face. But the look in his eyes, it wasn't the cold, calculating look of a billionaire. It was raw panic. She slid the chain off and pulled the door open. Julian stumbled inside, bringing the smell of ozone-wet wool and the city storm with him. Clear's throat. He dripped a puddle onto her cheap rug immediately. He looked around the small, dim apartment, his eyes landing on the cardboard boxes. "You're leaving," he said, his voice hollow. "I'm moving," Elena corrected, crossing her arms defensively. "I can't afford this place anymore. And I certainly can't stay in a city where my face is on every tabloid cover as the discarded waitress." Julian winced. He reached into his inner jacket pocket. His hands were shaking so badly he struggled to pull the object out. It was a folded document, soaked through the ink, bleeding into the paper. "I didn't come here to fight," Julian said, holding it out. "I came to bring you this." "What is it?" Elena asked, not taking it. "The NDAA check for $50,000 to keep my mouth shut. You can keep it, Julian. I told you my dignity isn't for sale. It's not an NDA." Julian roared, the sudden volume making her flinch. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "It's not money, Elena." "Look at it." Elena took the wet paper. It was heavy and cold. She carefully unfolded it. The text was smeared, but the header was legible. "Articles of Incorporation, the Thorne and Vance Foundation." Clear's throat. She frowned, looking up at him. "I don't understand. I didn't sign the deal with Novatech." Julian said, water dripping from his eyelashes. "I sat there, pen in." Clear's throat. hand looking at the board, looking at Isabella, and I realized I hated them. I hated me. He took a step closer, ignoring the water pooling around his expensive shoes. I walked out. He continued his voice, dropping to a whisper. I fired Isabella in front of everyone. I told the investors that a company that treats people like garbage doesn't deserve to exist. The stock is tanking right now. Elena, I've lost billions in the last hour. Billions! Elena stared at him, her mouth slightly open. You destroyed the merger. Because of what I said. Because of who you are. Julian corrected. I can't go back to being that man. The man who yells at waitresses. The man who drafts disposal plans for human beings. I want to build something real. This foundation, it's going to focus on medical equity, hospitals, treatments for people who can't pay. But I can't run it. I don't know how to care, Elena. I only know how to conquer. I need a partner who has a heart. Elena looked at the document again. Thorne and Vance, her name next to his. You're asking me to be your partner, she asked, her voice shaking. Julian, I'm a waitress. I have $300 in my bank account. You are the strongest person I have ever met. Julian said intensely. You faced me down when senators were afraid to look me in the eye. That is worth more than any degree. I can't, Elena said, stepping back, her back hitting the stack of boxes. I can't trust you, Julian. How do I know this isn't just another game, another PR stunt to fix your image because you had a meltdown? Julian looked devastated. He reached into his other pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen with wet fingers and turned it toward her. It was a banking confirmation. Transfer complete. 5,000 Desord beneficiary. Leo Vance, medical trust status, irrevocable. Elena stopped breathing. She stared at the numbers. $5 million. I did this before I came here, Julian said softly. Before I knew if you would ever speak to me again. It's irrevocable, Elena. Even if you kick me out right now, even if you never see me again, Leo is safe. He gets the best doctors. He gets the kidney. It's done. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic thrum of the rain. Elena looked from the phone to Julian's face. He wasn't lying. He had given away a fortune and destroyed his empire, all to prove one thing, that he was finally listening. Clear's throat. The wall she had built around her heart, the wall made of pride and survival instinct, crumbled. You idiot! She choked out tears, instantly blurring her vision. You absolute idiot! I know. Julianne smiled, a weak, exhausted, hopeful smile. I ruined my suit. You ruined your life. Elena sobbed, dropping the wet contract and closing the distance between them. No, Julian said, catching her as she crashed into him. I just started it. His arms wrapped around her, soaking her sweater instantly. But she didn't care. She buried her face in his wet chest, smelling the rain and the man beneath it. He held her tight, as if she were the only solid thing in a world that was falling apart. When he pulled back to look at her, his eyes were searching. Does this mean I'm hired? Elena laughed through her tears, reaching up to brush the wet hair from his forehead. It means you're on probation, and the first rule of the new company is no shouting. I can live with that, Julian whispered. He lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't the polite staged kiss of a gala. It was desperate, messy, and real. It tasted of rain and redemption. It was the kiss of two people who had nothing left to hide. Outside, the storm raged on, washing the streets of New York clean. The tabloids were already printing the headlines of Julian Thorne's spectacular collapse. The business world was calling it a tragedy. But in the small, drafty apartment in Queens, amidst the cardboard boxes and the sound of the rain, Julian Thorne knew the truth. He hadn't lost anything. For the first time in his life, he was exactly where he belonged. He pulled Elena closer, resting his chin on top of her head as they swayed in the quiet room. So he murmured into her hair, "What do we do now?" Elena looked over his shoulder at the eviction notice sitting on the counter, and then at the wet document on the floor. "Now," she said, squeezing his hand, "we get a towel, and then we save the world." And that is the story of how a single moment of courage changed everything. Eleanor proved that no amount of money gives someone the right to treat you poorly. And Julian proved that it's never too late to change who you are. In the end, the billionaire didn't save the waitress, she saved him. What would you have done if you were in Elena's shoes? Would you have taken the money and left? Or would you have demanded respect like she did? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice, romance, and karma, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss the next dramatic story. Thanks for watching, and remember, never let anyone silence your voice. See you in the next.